So there is a relationship theory that sits at the heart of all relationship concepts, and for me, this really explains everything. So it's called social exchange theory. If I'm expending effort on a relationship, I want there to be benefits and outcomes for you on the other side of the table. So if I'm spending a lot of time on our relationship but you aren't getting any benefit, that's a failure. What I realized is that it was linked to my diet. The food I was eating was really fundamental to my success, and I can't overstate that or understate that.
Hey listeners, welcome back to yet another episode of Inspire Someone Today. This is your platform for creating ripples of inspiration. Oh boy, the last 2 years, hasn't it been game-changing for all of us in terms of how the world around us has turned around? And what has impacted in the last 2 years is relationships. And we're still figuring it out for many of us for getting back to the workforce as to what the best way to restart those relationships, forge new relationships, and for all of us, how do we get out of the lockdown mode to a real mode and build relationships? Joining us today on this episode of Inspire Someone Today is Ryan O'Sullivan, who has spent a major part of his career in client-facing roles in analyzing client relationship data to improve business performance. He's had a stint with Infosys for a little over 8 years and now works for a company that has a software which measures the quality of client relationships. He has recently completed his doctorate, focusing on how to measure the quality of B2B relationship. It's an absolute joy and pleasure to welcome Ryan O'Sullivan on this episode. Ryan, welcome.
Thank you, Sri. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to today.
Well, we did start off saying that you are helping B2B organizations in demystifying business relationships. So from that standpoint, if I were to ask, why do relationships matter? And if you can touch upon the critical element of relationship capital as a resultant of that.
Well, I think, as you suggested in the intro there, Sri, and we think about any situation that you're in, personally or professionally, and we think about how a relationship with someone can help you to solve the problem or to achieve an objective. And I think when we think about relationships in that context, it's very hard to argue against the fact that they don't matter. So relationships can give you insight, they can give you advice, guidance, they can give you introductions in any facet of life. And in my opinion, relationships are the fuel that gets you to where you want to go. Whatever it is from A to B, it can be a jet fuel to get you there a lot quicker. And I think with the advent of COVID and this shift to virtual relationships, I know it was difficult for everybody, but if you're looking from sort of the glass half full type of perspective, you would come to realize that today it's possible for anyone, anywhere on planet Earth to build a relationship with anyone else, wherever they are. So that, I think, is a realized fact at the moment. I mean, you and I are a great example of that, other sides of the world, and we've built a relationship virtually. And you talked about relationship capital, and that's the dimension of relationships as an asset. And what I'd like to do is sort of think about other types of asset classes that you might have on a personal level and try to put it in that context to help people understand how I think about it. And if you think about financial capital, that's all of your wealth across the different types of asset classes, and that's your financial capital. And you can also think about your academic capital, for example, which is your schooling, your education, your university degrees, and whatever else that might be. That's something that you've been building up, and that's an asset that you have that you can carry around with you. And then your professional capital, for example, if you want to use that term to categorize your work, your CV, your history of your employment. And in that same context, I'd like to suggest that you can consider relationship capital as the aggregate of all of your relationships, and that's personal and professional, and think about it holistically like that. These relationships are an asset that you own and that you build. And I challenge people to think about relationship capital in that context. And it's an asset that they can leverage for their own benefit, for others' benefit, and something they can bring to the table in a conversation about a new job or a new role, things like that. And that's on an individual level. From a company perspective, relationships are actually the most important asset they have, but they are the least measured, and they are really, it's intangible. So it's something that is difficult to get a handle on, but is really vital for a company's success.
Very true. And that's a very interesting take that you're giving here, just not about relationship, but also about relationship capital. Are there certain components that define what relationship capital is all about that people need to be aware of? And the other interesting reference that you made is measuring relationship capital. That's very unique. Tell us a bit more about that as well.
Well, if you think about relationship capital on two levels, and I've already talked about that in the past, you've got the one-to-one level. That's the relationship capital that I have with you, Sri, for example. And then you've got the corporate level, which would be the relationship my company has as a whole with a client that our company has. So in those two contexts, they come together in the end, but you got to think about them separately for a second. And if you go for the one-to-one level and you think about the literature definition of relationship quality, you'll find that it's pretty clear what the literature said. And I mentioned previously that I've just completed my doctorate in how to measure the quality of client relationships. So I've done quite a bit of research over the past 5 or 6 years into this space around relationships and measuring relationships. And the literature definition says that there's 3 components to relationship capital. First one is commitment. That's the investment of time, energy, and financial investment into the relationship. So that's something you can measure on a one-to-one level and at a company-to-company level. The second piece to it is trust. And this is the fundamental component of relationship capital. And on an individual level, again, there's a further definition around sort of on a one-to-one level, you're thinking about the ability, the integrity, the benevolence of those people that you're building a relationship with. Do they understand your business, the priorities? These sort of things lead into building trust on a one-to-one level. And then trust at a corporate level, which is between the two organizations. This is built through the credentials, their experience, their partnership mentality. Do they bring the right people to the table? The track record of delivery, attitude around fixing things and taking ownership, responsibility at a company level. All of these things build into the concept of trust at a corporate level. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is the outcomes of all of that, which is satisfaction, client satisfaction. So are they satisfied with what they are getting out of that relationship? And I've spoken about that in the business to business context. I think that's the best sort of thing to go with here. So if you want to look at the components of relationship capital, to summarize there, we're looking at the commitment, the levels of trust that exist, and then the outcomes of what's been delivered to the customer satisfaction.
Yeah, that's nice. That's interesting to kind of now make the intangible a bit tangible through the means of these components. And in your experience, you did mention about you have a PhD in looking at this relationship outcomes. From your experience, what makes a relationship evolve? What are the secret sauce or ingredients of a relationship turning to be great relationships?
So there is a relationship theory that sits at the heart of all relationship concepts. And for me, this really explains everything. So it's called social exchange theory. And what that theory says is to build a relationship with somebody, you need to give them something of value. And when you look at the historical significance of this theory, it goes back thousands of years, in fact, and it goes back to the idea that when you were meeting somebody for the first time, back in the olden days, you would bring them a gift as a symbol of what the relationship meant to them. So you would arrive to meet them for the first time and you would bring a gift as a symbol of what that relationship would mean to you. And that would set the relationship off on the right trajectory. And if we fast forward to today's sort of modern world, what we realize is that it's not gifts that we're bringing to people when we meet them for the first time in the business context, but if we think about it as value. So we really have to be bringing value to individuals to set the relationship off on the right context and on the right trajectory. So that concept of social exchange theory really defines what is the fundamental heart of all relationships, which is you have to be exchanging things that are of value. And what the theory says is once you start that process, once you make that first move by bringing value, pure value to an individual, an interesting thing happens. So they want to return the favor. And it becomes like a tennis match where a ball's coming back and forward. So you bring value to one individual and they want to return the favor to you by bringing value to you. And you get this exchange that's taking place over the course of that relationship, back and forward, back and forward. That's a healthy relationship in the context of social exchange theory. But if you think about how this would work in reality, there's a model that sits behind it, and it calculates the value of relationships. And what it says is that if you are exchanging something that is not of value to an individual, then they don't receive it in the spirit which is meant. And if it's taking it in the business context, you spend a lot of time creating a proposal or creating a presentation or something like that. And then you go to present that to a client or you send it to a client and they don't read it. They don't even open it. That was something that took you a lot of time, but it wasn't perceived as valuable on their side. That is when things aren't working. But if you're preparing things for them that are perceived as valuable, they will accept it as valuable and then return the favor back to you. And if you think about this in a personal context, you can apply the same logic to all relationships that we have in our personal life. And you think about, is it a one-way relationship where you're always doing things for that one person and getting nothing in return? Or is it a mutually beneficial relationship where you're doing things for them, they're doing things for you, and you start to understand the dynamics of that relationship.
Interesting theory out there. Does it also kind of draw a very thin line between when you're out there either making personal relationship or business relationships, that it is seen always with a lens of, okay, what's the value I'm getting out of this conversation, or what's the value I'm getting out of this interaction? Become more transactional rather than building relationship for the sake of building relationships.
What I would revert back to is this whole concept of social exchange theory. So it's not necessarily about value to me or outcomes to me personally. In the spirit of what you're describing, which is sort of an altruistic way of working, if I'm expending effort on a relationship, I want there to be benefits and outcomes for you on the other side of the table. So if I'm spending a lot of time on our relationship, but you aren't getting any benefit, that's a failure. Whether I'm getting benefits from you is another story. But I think if we approach it in the sense that my time and my investment should be bringing value to the other party, that's the premise with which I consider the fundamental approach when it comes to building relationships.
So what is it for the receiver to kind of take value out of this particular relationship is the center theme of the social exchange theory.
Yeah, and the outcomes for them, and I mean, it might, like I say, it doesn't have to be that it's generating revenue. It could be humor. It could be that you enjoy each other's companies, that I make you feel good and we have fun. This is an outcome for you. So you can apply it on all different levels. But the point is that there has to be some connection and there has to be some type of exchange. And you might be getting knowledge and insight from our relationship, and I might be having pleasant time and sort of learning some interesting stories about something else. So it doesn't have to be an equal exchange of individual components. As long as I'm getting something back on my side that I consider to be valuable, and you're getting something out of this that you consider to be valuable, that's a healthy relationship. When things start to go wrong is when it's a one-way street, and that goes for personal and that goes for professional. The one-way street is obviously on both sides of the table as well, where if I'm putting a lot of effort in and you're not seeing any value, or you're seeing a lot of value and I'm getting nothing in return, then things are on the wrong balance. This is the premise of social exchange theory, I should say. That they would say that is not a balanced relationship. It won't prove fruitful long term.
And as we move further, Ryan, a key component of any relationship is the quality and depth of it. And from your work and your experiences that you've had in this field, what is that one thing that is most important when it comes to building either client relationships or personal relationships?
I think that's a very easy question to answer, to be perfectly honest. And if I told you that through my doctorate research, I interviewed a lot of key executives about the significance of their most important relationships. We transcribed all of those interviews. I did a word cloud, and there was one word that was big and in the middle of all of those interviews, and that word was trust. And if you go back to I think one of your recent podcast attendees, Joel Peterson, he was talking about trust, his book, 10 Laws of Trust, and there's others, there's many, many other books. Yeah. So there's many books been written, and I'm sure there'll be many more about the importance of trust. So that really sits at the heart of any relationship, personal and professional. There's some components of that which you can sort of delve into, and through my research, we look at what the literature definition of trust is, and there's some extra flavor in there, which is around, in a B2B context at least, is the ability of the individual. You're looking at their credibility, their effectiveness to get things done, and their ability to do their job, which is one element to that. The second part is integrity, which is a key component of trust, and that's their honesty or their transparency, and are they committed to what they're doing, and doing what they say they would do. That all fits under the integrity piece. You've got benevolence, which is this sense of just caring, this empathy and emotional investment in what you're doing. So that's ability, integrity, and benevolence, which form the definition of trust. But this is always in the context of from the client's perspective. So you always have to be thinking about the client, and again, back to the value to the client and how you understand their priorities and how you're helping them achieve their objectives. This is never about you, never about anything that you want to get. It can only be about how do you help the client in their context achieve the objectives or solve the problems that they have. And if you're approaching things from that perspective, that's going to really contribute to them trusting you.
And any specific practices that individually, if I were to kind of enhance my relationship quality with somebody, any specific practices that I can look into?
Yeah, well, I can give you a bit of insight from my doctorate research, the findings, if you will. So I spoke to CXOs at global corporations, some of the biggest Fortune 500 corporations out there. And I asked them a very simple question. I said, thinking back through your career, can you think about the best individual you ever worked with from the vendor side? someone that really made the difference for you. And they all immediately thought of somebody, and we discussed what made them so special. What did they do that was different from everybody else? And this formed the basis of my data for my doctorate research. So I conducted thematic analysis across all the interviews. So what I found here, I'm just going to maybe talk through some of the key parts, what all of them did all of the time. So it's just, if you've got a real checklist of behaviors that matter when it comes to building quality relationships. And this is what the best of the best did, if you will. And the concept of communication, which is there. So obviously you have to be in communication with people to be able to build a relationship. It's different once you've created that relationship, because you can go often for years at a time without speaking, and then you can come back and it's like you were never apart. That's when you've got a solid relationship already. And we all know those relationships from our personal life and professional life. But when it comes to building a relationship, to getting to that level, you need to be in communication, obviously. So that's the prerequisite. But there's an interesting thing that happens before trust starts to build. So there's a thing called, which I called in my research, mutual disclosure. So it's like this little dance that happens while you're in those initial communications with someone, and you're basically trying to size them up. Are they someone that I want to open up to? And there's a few things here that all of those people had in place. One is what the client described that I was interviewing. So it was an aligned personality, or it certainly was not a clash of personalities. They talked in the past of how if there's a clash of personalities, it's very difficult to overcome that. So this is something which is hard to actually overcome if there is a clash there. So the way they described it from the client side, that if that's in place, it's very difficult to work around that. So aligned personality is one thing, and the second thing there was a solid work ethic. The people they described were working really hard and wanted to do a good job for them. So that was the second thing around this mutual disclosure. The third thing is what they said was a solid domain and technical knowledge. So they came to the table with an understanding of their business, understanding of the technology, understanding of the domain, the landscape. So those three things combined satisfied this mutual disclosure piece. And if you remember here, we're talking about CXO relationships. So once you've satisfied those three, then they feel like they're happy to have a more detailed conversation with you. And that's when we get into trust, which I've already described the definitions there. So that's when people really need to be honing in on their ability to do their job, their integrity, the benevolence, focusing on the client, etc. So I think understanding this mutual disclosure piece would really help you to get into the right space.
That seems like a wonderful bridge between communication and trust is mutual disclosure. Okay, here we are continuing our conversations with Ryan and in the Power of Three round. So Ryan, you're a freshly minted PhD student. I no longer can call you student, but we are all student of life. If I were to ask you what were your three learnings while pursuing your PhD, what would that be?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think if I'm answering these honestly, which is obviously the best way to do it, before I started the PhD and I was researching relationships and how to build relationships, I thought I knew a lot. And I thought after the PhD, I'd know everything. So I thought, that's great. Let's do the PhD. And as I've recently completed the PhD, I realized what I thought was important was wrong. So I actually had the wrong information. And what I know now is just scratching the surface, literally just scratching the surface. So I feel less confident about my knowledge, having researched it for 6-7 years. So that's one learning. And on that journey, I think I learned more about myself through going through this PhD than anything else I've ever done in my life. I don't want to make light of it. It was a real challenge for me to be perfectly honest. And I always half joking, half seriously say to people that if I knew how much work it would have taken before I started the PhD, I never would have done it. So obviously once I'd thrown myself in, I was always going to complete it. But so the second point here is this understanding how I consume information, and anyone that knows anything about academia would be familiar with academic articles. And I really struggled to consume those academic articles that they're written in English, and I'm born in England. I'm a native English speaker, and I'm reading these articles, and I'm reading paragraph after paragraph. And after 5 minutes, I have to shake my head and think, I don't understand anything I've just read. So I have to go through it again. And it was very difficult to digest this content for me. I struggled with it. So that was a real learning. And I realized if I could get some of the concepts from YouTube or something like I said, social exchange theory, start to understand some of that stuff visually through YouTube. And that really helped me to get the concept in my mind. And then when I'd go back to reading the academic articles, it was a lot clearer and a lot easier. So that was another learning of just me, myself, how I consume data. And I think that leads to maybe number 3, which is an absolute respect for the world of academia. I think being out, I mean, I did my MBA 20 odd years ago and out of academia for that long, and we've been in the corporate world, but I just think a renewed respect for academia, for what they do, the depth of detail they go to, the frameworks and structures that they have in place for all of the stuff that's happening, and the rigor with which they go through things just really changed the way that I had my perception around the value that can bring to the corporate world as well. I think there's a lot of value in these academic articles and the world of academia in general that could be tapped more effectively in the corporate world.
So, Ryan, 3 routines that is uniquely yours.
This is a really important question, I think, for me to answer, because when I think about I'm obviously working full time, I'm married, I've got an 8-year-old daughter, and doing this PhD. Well, it was actually a DBA, by the way, just as it's a technical difference. It's a doctorate in business administration, but it's the same qualification, by the way. But for me to apply myself and for me to actually be in the right mentality to conduct this work and to consume the information and to create the right output required me to be in the right frame of mind. And again, this was a real learning process for me. And what I realized is that it was linked to my diet. The food I was eating was really fundamental to my success. And I can't overstate that or understate that with, it was really down to eating fruits and vegetables predominantly. I mean, I don't know how weird this sounds to people, but I cut out, thanks to my wife, actually, this is a diet that she follows, and we've been following it for quite a while, actually. But the point is, this is our standard diet, which is fruits and vegetables. We don't eat gluten. We don't eat dairy. We don't have any refined sugar, no processed foods. And that keeps a very clear mind for me. And it helps me to sleep well, which is the second routine. And the third piece is the exercising in the morning and doing some sort of Kundalini mantras and a bit of yoga stroke stretching. So the food, which enables me to be thinking clearly, the going to sleep early, waking up early, and then doing that bit of exercise in the morning really creates the right environment for me to be focused and successful. And I think the point I'd like to make is, if for some reason I didn't follow a good diet for whatever happens, and, I might be away on business, or I might have friends visiting or whatever else, that would affect the entire system, the ecosystem of my sleep and my exercise. And that would affect my ability to focus on my work and to be working to creating good quality output. So you start to understand these things about yourself when you put yourself under pressure. And like I say, I really feel like the food and the lifestyle piece is so important now as I'm well into my 40s. I think, as we start to understand how that affects you as well, I really think that a lot of people can benefit from changing their food, certainly their food, if not their general lifestyle.
Awesome. That's like Zen-like routines out there, Ryan. So you always get to hear or get to see this particular question is, what advice would you give to your younger self? So my question here is slightly different. 3 advices that you would give to your older self.
What I'd like to have happened by the time I'm 50 is really to expand it. Oh, yes, I think to expand on the work I'm doing now. I think in the whole relationship space, I think the real gap that I see in measuring the quality of relationships, the gap that exists, it's not around understanding trust. I think we can appreciate that lots of people are talking about the importance of trust, and nobody disagrees with that. But I think the biggest gap is around how do you identify individual decision makers and stakeholders, and how do you map those relationships across an organization, and how do you monitor the quality of those relationships? So I think that is really where there's a gap in what I see today. And I'd like to think that by the time I'm 50, as you said, I mean, that's 6 years away, but say 50, 55, I've filled that gap. So I'm looking to write a book around how we can approach that problem that I see around identifying the key decision maker landscape in an organization, whether it's on a deal level, a program level, or a key account level, and profiling those individuals and mapping and monitoring the quality of those relationships to a degree that then allows you to drive your strategies. So that's something that I'm particularly passionate about. And as I've researched this field for many years now, I think that's the place what people need some support and some insight.
3 books, videos, or podcast recommendation that you have for all of us?
Yeah, just picking up on what I talked about academia, and I was obviously serious about what I said about the respect for academia. And in Google, what I'd like to suggest is Google Scholar. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Sri, or if it's generally common knowledge that on the Google homepage, there's lots of different things you can search. You got maps, you got news, but there is one called Google Scholar, and you can find academic papers that are publicly available on almost every single subject known to mankind. And these academic papers are created with such rigor, such depth, such structure in the flow, the explanation, that I think people can benefit so much from using that resource alone to get these articles. And you might struggle with them the same as I did about, how to consume the content, because it's written in very sort of advanced academic style. But that resource is something which is just mind-blowing. So I put that one in there. I think I mentioned before about the importance of aligned personalities in building relationships. And there's a lot out there today around, for many years, around personality profiling, the big 5, all of this stuff. But a lot of that stuff is around your personality, but where we're coming at it from when you're aligning personalities with a client is to understand their personality. So it's great to know yours, but you need to know their personality. And there's a great process to do that. It's called social styles. So again, you can find that on YouTube, but there's a book called The Social Styles Handbook by Wilson Learning. It's a fantastic book that explains this process, but I'd suggest you just go straight to YouTube, put that in the search, and you'll see some videos. And it's a really simple way to assess the personality of the person you're talking to across two axes. And you can do it whether they are assertive or passive. And then I think there's one book. I mean, I read quite a few books, and there's a lot out there on trust. And I mentioned the 10 laws of trust, the trusted advisor, speed of trust. There's plenty that I consider to be like the staple in trust. But there's one book that I personally really found useful, and I recommend that a lot to people. And the name of the book is The Lean Startup. But the way the book's written, it's not about going and creating your own startup on it in isolation. It's just about how do you approach problems? How do you approach creating something? And it's about this whole fail fast. It's about create something, get feedback, and use that to drive the decision making. And I think that book is, it's a well-known book, but I personally love the way it's written, the structure, the anecdotes in there. So that'd be the third one that I'd think about.
That's a great collection to the library. Thank you so much for sharing that. Particularly like the Google Scholar, you are right. Not many folks are aware of the fact that there's rich knowledge, rich information available from the academia right out there. Finally, the last of the Power of Three round, Ryan. This is, since we are talking about relationships from a B2B standpoint, relationship from a person to person standpoint, any anecdotes that you have that kind of shares the whole gist of how the quality of relationship has helped in better business outcomes, or has helped in better enhancing personal relationships?
If I relate back to the research again, there's some key things that the good people did and the bad people didn't, or that the good people didn't do and the bad people did, if you know what I mean. So one thing was honesty, telling the unvarnished truth. And it's difficult sometimes, especially if we're talking B2B, vendor client, you're trying to present the best picture. Unequivocally, the feedback from these executives were they do not want that. They want the unvarnished truth. Tell me what the hell is going on. Don't sugarcoat it. Just tell me how it is. If everything's gone down the pan and we're in big trouble, I need to know that as soon as possible. I don't need to know a flowery story and you're trying to fix it in the back end. Don't go down that road. So the one thing the best of the best did is to be brutally honest all the time, direct, like they're a peer sat across the table, and they really respected that. So I think we can all sense where we do that and where we don't do that. Second thing is listening. I mean, it's an easy thing to say, and it's a common thing that we hear about. But again, I'll say it again, for the fact that you need to listen to what people are saying. And what the bad people do is they don't listen. They have the things they want to talk about and the things they want to put on the table, and they just wait for their opportunity to do that. So I think if you're listening, if you're engaged, if you are genuinely working for the benefit of your client to get them where they want to be, that involves listening and obviously reacting to that. So what we have to remember as people on the vendor side, if you will, if I'm talking to those set of people, is when we're dealing with clients, that they're very intelligent people, they're experts. They've been in this business for decades, and they've come across many different people. So they have a radar for identifying the people who they think can bring value. And these are the things that matter to them. So I think you got to be really honest with yourself around what you're trying to achieve in a relationship. And if it's just to sell your stuff and move on, I think the world's changed since then. So you're not able to be successful in business, and certainly won't be successful in building relationships if that's what's important to you, if you're not being honest and you're not listening. And then I think that leads to the third one, which is not selling. One of the things that repulsed these CXOs was this idea that the person on the other side of the table was always trying to sell them something. And the way they described the best of the best was, I mean, a few of them said they didn't even realize they were salespeople. You know, they were responsible for that relationship. They were client managers, or they were account managers in inverted commas, but they didn't sense throughout the entire history of the relationship, which could have gone on for many years, that they tried to sell them anything. So that's really describing what a real relationship means to an executive. And that's one that transcends jobs. It transcends professional to bleed over into personal, because you trust someone, you know they're looking out for you and not for themselves.
That's a great list, Ryan. Honesty, listening, I totally agree. I think many times in your eagerness to sell, you tend not to listen to the other person. And that's where you miss the whole value creation component. I can very so beautifully now start connecting the dots to what you have been articulating. Many of us in our corporate roles, we are figuring out how to go about doing our daily stuff. From that standpoint, Ryan, in a post-pandemic era, where a lot of the professionals have joined the organizations in a virtual or a hybrid mode, what would be a word of advice, wisdom to them that they can leverage to enhance their stakeholder relationships?
So we're talking about virtual relationships, and as we talked about before, that describes our relationship. So we've never met. We've had some communication on LinkedIn. We've had a few virtual conversations. And that, as far as I'm concerned, is blossoming into a real relationship, as I would call it. So in the sense that, would I be happy to help you in any way I can? Of course I would. I think that status has been achieved just through these types of interactions. Is it the same as meeting in person? Is it the same as walking down to the coffee shop and having a chit chat? Of course it's not. But this is the beauty, if you will, or the benefits, probably a better way to put it, of this virtual relationship model. That's one thing. So I think it does open up, like I started out the whole podcast to say, look, we are in it is a glass half full, in my opinion, where we can build relationships now with anyone, anywhere in the world. And if we hadn't had that shift through through COVID to permit that jump to Zoom or whatever platform you're using that would have been a difficult one to achieve. So we've got that grounding or foundation layer now. So that's one thing. But the reality is, it's not the same. You don't have the opportunity to get to know people as well as you do in person. That's the reality. So you don't have the informal chit chats. You're not standing sort of going up the lift or what you've been doing this weekend. It's much more difficult to have those conversations with someone, to really get to know them on a personal level. But just back to, again, from the research I was doing, what we realized from those interviews I did with the CXOs was that the relationships they were describing as the best they've ever had in their entire career were nothing to do with the personal side, nothing to do with the soft side of things. It was, aside from aligned personality, there was no shared hobbies. It's not that they both like cricket, or they both like to go to watch Arsenal play or stuff like that, or they both like food. It was really about business. It was really about achieving the objectives that they had from the client's perspective, and helping them achieve. They're driven professionals that want to deliver. So I think the reality is, as this is the unfortunate part, is I think it's really about business. It's about outcomes, and it's about understanding how you can help drive them to their objectives. And that's on a personal level. On a peer-to-peer level internally, within your organization, but also with clients. So I think you have that's the real downside to it. If you're running an only virtual relationship, there's less room to build your personality and your soft side into it, and it becomes inadvertently much more about the value you're delivering to that person and their team and that organization. If that makes sense.
It does, and it makes it even harder to build those kind of relationship in the hybrid or virtual world that we are in.
It does. Like I say, if relationship means get to know them on the softer side, their family, their wife, if they're married, have the kids' birthdays, what did you do the weekend, all this type of stuff. If that aspect of a relationship signifies a stronger relationship, then yes, I think to get to that detail is harder. But what my research showed and what I think is the trend is that stuff is less important in the professional world. And that's unfortunate. I don't think that's a good thing, to be perfectly honest, but that is the trend that this is moving to.
Right. And that kind of takes me to the last piece on this element of building relationships is one, we spoke about this virtual world kind of setup. The second more critical element is when you're transitioning within the organization or transitioning outside of the organization, you would have built so much of relationships. Again, what does your study, research, or experience show to say, how do you keep those kind of relationships that you have built over a period of time to kind of keep checking along as you move across organizations or as you move within organization?
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting one again. So you've got some great questions. I'll give you that, Sri. So this is, when you get into the detail of this, it tells you a lot about society as well. So I'm going to throw a word at you here. It's called propinquity. I don't know if you've come across that before. So that's a word that comes from social network theory. So it says that you build relationships with people that are in your vicinity. So they're in your locale. And this describes the type of relationships that you build at work, for example. So the only reason you're building a relationship with these people are because you work with them. I mean, let's go back to the in-person scenario. So you're walking in the office and there's someone sat opposite you. You build a relationship with them and you start talking to them because they're sat opposite you. And that's the same with all the people around you in the office. And that's called propinquity. So you're building relationships with people because they are close by to you. And some of those relationships transcend to a different level. And that's because you have things in common with them. So that's called homophily. So you'll have 20 people, for example, in your office or whatever your part of your office, and you'll have a better relationship with 2 or 3 of them, because this comes back to the stuff we were just talking about, because you both like to go and watch Leicester City, which is my football team, or you're both from Leicester, or you both you like cricket, or you both enjoy going to church, or whatever it might be. So there's some common interest that you have, which brings you closer together. So that's called homophily. And then there's a third dimension to this, which is multiplexity, which means that you actually meet those people in multiple places. So if you meet someone at work originally and you both like to go out to Michelin star restaurants or something like that, you both like to go to the theatre, then you go to the gym. So you go to the theatre together. So you start to do things in different environments. That's called multiplexity. So that's a long answer again to explain an answer to your question, which is, how do you keep in contact with people when you're moving roles? And the reality is, and I think most people listening that have been around for a while will know that you have lots of colleagues that you engage with on a regular basis at your job, and you love them all, and you miss them all when you go to your next job. And 90+% of them you'll probably never see again for the rest of your life. That's the reality in person, because you don't have homophily, you don't have multiplexity. But the people who you keep in touch with are the ones where you've got that relationship, where you're doing things that you enjoy, they're the ones that relationship has transcended to the highest level, which again, you might not see each other for a year, but if somebody drops you a text, you're going to be on the phone and say, how are you doing? Great. And that relationship is still there because you've gone through those stages of propinquity, homophily, and multiplexity to have what you'd consider to be a real relationship. And that I'm describing here like a work type of relationship on a personal level, not a B2B relationship. But I mean, the same principle applies to some respects. So I hope that answers your question.
This is super stuff. You have helped me to kind of really join the dots on some of the questions that I had in my mind. So this absolutely makes sense. Thank you for that. Ryan, this show is all about creating ripples of inspiration. And as we kind of come to a close on this particular conversation, what is Ryan's Inspire Someone Today message to all the listeners out there?
Well, I just really challenge people, as I say, to consider relationships as the fuel for their life, to achieve what they want to achieve. Nothing stopping you doing anything in the world. I think I feel like people should, the way the world's going today, sometimes you can be a bit depressed or you can be a bit conscious about where you feel your place is in the world, but just feel that you can achieve anything you want to set your mind to, and there'll be people that will help you along the way. Me included, you included, Tree. I think there's such a warmth of people out there that would be more than willing to help anybody do anything. So I think be inspired, be motivated, challenge yourself to go anywhere, do anything, learn anything, and you will be amazed at how many people will be pulling a hand out and giving you a hand up every step of the way. I've had this all through my life. I think back about people that have helped me, and I'm so happy to do it for other people as they go through their journey. And I'm sure I'll have my hand out for people to help me again as my journey progresses. But I think we're in a great position with the virtual relationships where we can reach out to anyone, anywhere, and we can prosper. So there's a message of hope and a message of unabated ambition. Just go and do whatever you want. Nobody's stopping you.
Nobody's stopping you. Message of hope and unabated ambition. Couldn't have been a better summary than that, Dr. Ryan O'Sullivan. Thank you so much for everything that you shared during the course of this conversation. I enjoyed every bit of it. Thank you and appreciate your time and your sharing.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Sri. I really enjoyed it as well.
Thank you for listening into today's edition of Inspire Someone Today. It's been a privilege to bring in these conversations. If you like this episode and have any feedback or comments, do mail me at inspiresomeonetodaypodcast@gmail.com. Inspiring someone is like creating ripples around us. If you like what to listen, feel free to share them and let's create ripples of inspiration. Do not forget to follow me on my Instagram handle @InspireSomeoneTodayPodcast for all the latest updates. This is Srikanth, your host, signing off, and until next time, keep inspiring.